Very much to the full team of Gioco News. I'm Cristian Tirabassi. I'm a senior partner of Icom Leisure. We are an advisory and M&A boutique specialized in international betting and gaming industry. So we've been following clearly what happened in the last 2 months. Having regular conversation with all the stakeholders of the industry in a number of markets. Today with me on this panel, I have Heathcliff Farrugia, the CEO of Malta Gaming Authority. Good morning, Heathcliff. Peter Remens, President of Assisa. Birgit Sand, gambling consultant of the IAGR patron. Jason Frost, President of Euromat. Francesco Rodano, Chief Policy Officer of Playtech. Ludovico Calvi, President of the Global Lottery Monitoring System. And Andrea Rossi, Managing Director of Southern Europe and LATAM for Betson. Good morning to you all. So I think it's very important today to have so many different points of view on the same basically situation, which is the crisis that has started with COVID-19. Where clearly we can see that globally there's been a number of macro element of crisis in relation to the gaming industry. So gaming industry as betting and gaming industry. So the first element clearly has been the stop of all the betting events, so the sports event that basically generate the betting industry. And the second macro area has been clearly the relationship with the land-based operation, which in a number of countries around the globe, different stage, but basically around the first weeks of March has been closed, as part of a larger close down due to COVID-19. So these two elements clearly have generated a number of issues. The first one, and if we could go to the next slide, is being clearly the decrease of GGR that has been very strong from a point of view of decrease of GGR. So all the GGR generated by the land-based location on the different verticals, so gaming and betting vertical, has been missing, as well as all the GGR related to the 2020 and betting has clearly decreased. So there are some forecasts in relation to the market that basically they will see for the first time in the last 18 years or 20 years, I've been in the industry since the late 90s, a serious decrease of GGR at the global level. So there's been an increase, and this year basically we are looking for probably 8, 10, in case a 15% decrease with the element that we have up to today. Clearly it depends how long the lockdown will be. So these are the arguments we want to treat this morning, and what I would like to do is to start with Heathcliff Farrugia, CEO of the Malta Gaming Authority. Heathcliff, it would be interesting for us to understand a little bit your point of view, as the Maltese Gaming Authority that is clearly an international hub for the online gaming and betting industry, both B2C and B2B. To understand a little bit what has been your experience of the situation and what kind of measures or development you see in the coming month. Heathcliff, to you.
Thanks, Alessio. Good morning. Good morning, Alessio, Christian. Good morning to the panelists and to all those who are following this conference live. Well, as you said, Alessio, the circumstances we are living in have obviously made us really think and assess the way we do things. And I believe both regulators and operators had to adapt to this situation by doing things differently or by delivering the same service through a different channel. I think overall, as you said, a lot will be different when things start returning to normal, but a lot will also remain the same. And I don't think everything will change, like many are saying. Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball to predict the future, and most probably many have more questions than answers at this stage. However, in the coming weeks, proper data analysis, in my opinion, will be key to start having answers to these questions. Many times, in my opinion, we see a number of decisions being taken without any evidence, without data, and purely taken on assumptions or perceptions. And I believe that if we want to get this right, both from an operator's perspective, but also from a regulator's perspective, we need to look at the data so that we can properly understand the shifts between the gaming verticals, the change in player behavior, the potential increase in problem gambling. All these are extremely important to understand how the future will look like post-COVID-19. But looking at the data, and I reiterate, is crucial to make informed decisions. I think even if we start with what you mentioned earlier, and it was at least our concern, and I believe the concern of many other regulators I spoke with during these weeks, is the fact that over the past weeks we have seen practically all European countries shut down all land-based activity. And some were arguing, and potentially rightly so, that in the absence of the land-based activity, there was a shift to online casino, for example, if you look at casinos. And in fact, there was an increase in online casino over the past weeks, but we still need to understand, in my opinion, where this increase is coming from. Is it predominantly a shift from land-based to online during COVID-19? Or is it perhaps the same online casino players who are actually wagering more than they used to because now they are on lockdown? Did the customer base of online casino operators increase over the past weeks? And if yes, by how much? Was the increase in online casino temporary? And will it go down to lower levels if the pandemic is prolonged further? And in my opinion, there are all these questions, and only by having the necessary data to answer all these questions will we be in a position to really understand how things will change post-COVID-19. But if I can say what we have seen for sure, but is that a number of land-based operators who, for various reasons, have in the past overlooked the online possibilities, now they had to quickly adapt and launch their online arm. And I honestly doubt that these land-based operators who have now ventured out in the online world will go back to being completely land-based from now onwards. So I believe that land-based will now give more importance to online from now onwards. And I don't know, perhaps by teaming up with online operators, I'm not sure how the formula will be, but time will tell. Another interesting thing we are closely monitoring, an interesting phenomenon, is that of sports betting. In the absence of the majority of sports events and football leagues, and we've seen even numbers of our operators seeing a drop in activity of even 80% drop in activity when it comes to sports betting, obviously because the major sports leagues, especially across Europe, are suspended. Now, at the same time, but an interesting phenomenon was the fact that we've seen an increase in esports. Now, here again, we are currently collecting data, so we understand exactly the magnitude of this increase. And here again, we still have a number of questions which still need to be answered. So we need to understand whether the current popularity in esports, for example, is temporary or not, whether with the return of the traditional sports leagues, which remain by far the most popular, the esports will go down to pre-COVID levels, or whether it will still remain on high levels. But here again, looking at the data will be key. But having said so, here again, I honestly doubt that sports events which have created their esports arm over the past weeks will simply go back to being without post-COVID. And I'm sure you followed, but we've seen F1, NBA, we've seen NASCAR, even Bundesliga, they all created their own virtual leagues. And I doubt that post-COVID-19 now, they will simply remove the esports part. On the contrary, I believe that they will most probably keep building on it now that they have created that. And from a regulator's perspective, obviously, we need to be able to understand this, and we need to be able to quantify and understand to what extent this will happen. Because if esports remains high in popularity, then as regulators, perhaps we will need to give it more importance and properly assess what should or should not be allowed in terms of betting on esports, for example. We are aware that whilst a number of tournaments are properly organized and in a very professional way, some others are not. Hence, as regulators, we need to discuss this. And we need to also have discussions with the major esports associations so that together, in my opinion, we can protect the future of esports. And then I think one last interesting thing, and on a different note, but one interesting aspect of this pandemic, in my opinion, Christian, it was that, and this time is from an operational perspective, and one of the few positives I can see in all this crisis, to be honest, but this surely is teleworking. And I think many were pleasantly surprised with the success story teleworking had or is having during this pandemic. And I believe that post-COVID, teleworking will still remain very popular, even though many had surely experienced some form of teleworking before. So it's not that teleworking was invented now. However, I don't think there was ever the need to practically have a full organization working remotely. And I believe the results were very positive. So I believe teleworking is here to stay. And whereas there will always be some form of presence in the traditional offices, I believe that a number of companies will be seriously looking at incentivizing teleworking as a measure to reduce operational expenses. And here I'm not saying that we will be having all employees working from home, but surely a mix between days in office and days working remotely is something, in my opinion, which many will be considering post this crisis. So, Christian, so surely interesting times ahead post-COVID, and then from my end, obviously, I hope that this crisis is over sooner rather than later, so we can all get back to some form of normality, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Higley, for this actually interesting element you are covered. For sure, it's important to understand, you know, what is the timing of going back, but as well, this e-sport element, I think it's a very interesting element from clearly the compliance and the integrity point of view, which we probably will discuss further today. I would like to remember to our viewers that basically we have the Q&A session on the Zoom platform, or you can send the question directly to Gioco News, and the panelists will be happy to engage in this question in the second part of our webinar today. Jason, I would like to start with you from the industry. You're the president of Euromat. You clearly joining us from a land-based gaming hall, so which I assume it's closed today, unfortunately. So can you give us, your point of view on how, the operator that are part of your organization has been, facing the issue and what you see coming in the future?
Okay, thank you. Hello to everyone. And firstly, before I start, I just want everybody to know that I have sympathy with everybody who's been affected by COVID-19, both directly and indirectly, because it's a dreadful situation that we all find ourselves in. Moving forwards, I think that the lockdown, and prior to the lockdown, operating land-based operations like mine, the recommendation was that people stayed at home, avoided to go out. So therefore, we started to see a decline in turnover over those weeks leading up to the lockdown. When lockdown happened, and I think all across Europe, the handouts that governments have done, the assistance that they've given some countries, I think has been pretty good. They got off on the right start. Well, I'll come back to that bit a bit later on. But now, of course, we look towards reopening and what that may look like across Europe. Most countries, members of Euromat, have put papers into their governments, local authorities, regulators, stipulating the kind of things that they would put in place, protection measures. Obviously, social distancing will play a big part. Therefore, what you see behind you is a row of machines in my arcade. We'll have to spread these out much further. In some cases, some operators are talking about putting plexi screens in between machines. I know this has been looked upon as a very good idea. For me personally, I have a slight issue with it because when you put the plexi screen in place, you then have to send a member of staff in to go and clean them after somebody's played on them. I think it would be much better if we could just space things out and give players more distance. Increased hygiene is something that obviously every country is looking at. Hand sanitizers, increased cleaning levels on machines cleaned before and after somebody uses them, and PPE for staff and customers where appropriate. On a personal level, some of the problems that I have there, and I fear for members, is that in the future, there could well be legal implications around COVID-19. And I'll give you an example. My staff currently maybe 60, 65 years old. They're isolating at home. They're safe. They haven't got COVID-19. Once lockdown is lifted, I have to call my staff and say, okay, it's time to come back to work. They come back to work and we give them the PPE provided, maybe a mask or the hand sanitizers, the gloves, whatever's required by law, we will do. And then they catch COVID-19 for whatever reason. Now, in this world that we live in with all these ambulance chasers, law firms, no win, no fee, legal claims, we could be looking at claims in the future. So I would advise all operators to take a bit of advice on that before we put stuff in place. And also the other thing is from the authorities that grant us permission to reopen, it would be nice if they gave us a standard that we should use for our PPE. Now, for example, if you're on a building site and you have to wear a hard hat, that hard hat would normally have to be a certain standard. In the UK, it's BS something, something, something. And if you haven't got the correct standard one, it's not as, it doesn't do the proper job. So I think that it would be good for the authorities to give us a standard of what PPE products we should be purchasing for our staff and our customers. That then brings me on to the next thing, of course, which is cash. People playing with cash. I mean, at the moment, excuse me, at the moment, I've just spoken about AGCs, adult gaming centres, but of course we have family entertainment centres as well. Now, for an adult gaming centre, our footfall is fairly low. We don't have that many customers in at any one time. So therefore, I would have thought that adult gaming centres could probably open earlier, maybe when retail does on the high street. But for family entertainment centres, bingo halls, casinos that rely on large amounts of people, I mean, they're going to have to make some serious changes and are willing to do so. I think that before the seaside arcades, entertainment centres can open, it has to be movement of people in place first. And that's obviously everybody's big fear, is people moving all around the country. Will that overwhelm health services in those more rural areas? So I think that's something that we're watching on a daily basis. But of course, as we all know, everything changes daily. This conversation we're having today would have been much different last week because the things are moving on so fast. But going back to cash, I think it's been proven that the virus can last on a harder surface more, i.e. coins, notes, etc. So lots of companies that have cashless systems in place is a great thing. Where it's illegal to use a card on a machine. In the UK, the trade association there, BACTA, has made a cashless system for playing machines online called GPT, Gameplay Technology. And how this works, it works via an app. So you download the app, and on the app, there are social responsibility measures, i.e. the customer can set their spend limits, how much they want to spend. They can set days. If they only wanted to play at the weekend, for instance, they could set those kind of limits. They could set a daily spend limit, a weekly, monthly spend limit. And then effectively it becomes a wallet. They load the wallet up and they go to the machine, and through near field communication, they can wirelessly transfer money to the machine. Now, under the money laundering regulations, if you use the app, anything you win has to then be returned to the app. But of course, this near field communication means that people aren't having to touch money, which is a good thing. But for other operators like myself, I don't have the system in place. And therefore, I'm not sure that there should be a cost to operators to reopen. So we will have to be careful how we operate with cash in the future. I think my biggest worry is the protection of my staff and my customers when we come to reopen. That's my biggest fear, and I'm sure that'll be the same for everybody. And also the other thing is that I believe that governments and local authorities need to look at the support they can give businesses as we come out of COVID-19. If you take it as a recession, which undoubtedly it will be, more businesses go bankrupt coming out of recession than going into it. And I think the problem is that governments all over Europe have put very good help packages in place with the paying of staff's wages, grants where applicable, stopping rents in some countries. But I think that there's more help that's going to be required as we come out of this and as we begin to reopen. Because if we're reopening under social distancing measures, limited amount of people in the venues, it could very well be limited hours as well. As I believe in Serbia, they from 6 p.m. Until 8 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody out. So therefore, any shops that open have to close at 5, so their staff have time to get home before the 6 curfew. So if we're limited hours, limited time, limited people in the venues, our businesses will struggle to survive because we won't be taking the same amount of revenue that we were prior to lockdown. And I think it's very important that governments understand this. And that's pretty much all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to stick around.
Thank you, Jason. We probably have some question. We see a question coming in. If you guys believe that that there will be a change in the habit of players regarding the land-based operation, but we'll come back to that. Thank you, Jason. I would like to ask Francesco Rodano. Now you're the Chief Policy Officer of Playtech, a large B2B and operator. From your point of view, what has been the experience of your group and the activity and your activity with this crisis, and what kind of development you see coming?
Okay, thank you, Christian. Thank you, Alessio. I must say, I know Alessio since like 10 years ago. He's the nicest guy, and finally I'm able to attend an event of his. So thanks a lot. Yeah, I would like to just tell you about how this situation actually changed the way we operate in the company, the way we do business, and maybe there's some learnings to be taken from this experience. First of all, I guess, but that applies to all of us, we are demonstrating how the human beings can adapt to unprecedented scenarios. Here, this is a practical example. We are all here. We are speaking at a panel from our homes. I'm actually in my bedroom, which is, and because it's the quieter area of the apartment, while my kid is doing homeschooling in the other room. While in the past, we would have planned the trip, booked the flights, hotel, go through security, traveling. It's a long process to do the same thing. Yeah, you all know the drill. We met each other many times around the world. Yeah, this is probably more efficient in terms of time. I don't know if it's better or worse, but it's happening. So that's some resiliency taking place. And to adapt, we had to embrace new practices, both in the way we organize the work, and in the way we organize the business we do. And I'd say we're learning a lot on several aspects. In general, the first thing that comes to mind is that we've been spending a lot of time, all of us, I guess, all the companies, a lot of time and money in what's called a crisis management. I remember long meetings analyzing the weirdest possible scenarios, including a pandemic that would never occur in theory. And turns out it was money well spent. So when this thing happened, we were able to switch from office to home like practically seamlessly overnight. And there's some interesting things happening. I don't know if it's the same for you, but and if it's driven by the need of breaking the isolation that we are in since like 6 weeks ago now. But we are reaching out more to workmates, to business partners, to contacts. So there's like a better communication flow than we were under the same roof. So I don't know if I would give up the chance of meeting people in person. No, probably not. I miss shaking hands with you, all of you guys in person. But maybe we got something in our way we communicated that we could keep in the future. Or Jason, I was supposed to come to Dublin next week. There was the Euromat summit. And instead I'll be stuck in my bedroom again. Not the same thing. Then there's also something that's applying to most companies. I see there's an increased focus on of social responsibility in some way. So in my company, we've always been very attentive to the well-being of employees. There's seminars, there's mental health workshops. And there's also a culture of trying to help others as much as possible. The volunteering is incentivized, there's fundraising for good causes. Now in this period, this has been even increased, not only at Playtech. Now we also have positive psychology seminars to better deal with the isolation. There's virtual learning programs. And in our offices around the world, people are giving their skills and their time to local charities. So when this will be over, I don't see why we can't maintain this increased level of commitment towards the society. So we have been learning how to improve, how to be more socially responsible. So let's value this skill. This applies to all businesses, but I think it's particularly important for the gambling sector, for which you all know the reputation lately is not so good. So a better CSR can't really hurt. And then there's something that applies specifically to the gambling business. So Jason told us all land-based gaming has stopped. There's something that actually makes me think that the negative trends in the public opinion around the world, especially mature countries, mature regulated markets, started from retail gaming, mostly from gaming machines. It's been this process that led governments to impose new restrictions, started from FOBTs in the UK, or VLTs and other machines in Italy, or even in Spain, not machines, but betting shops caused a lot of noise in the streets, and then eventually the government took action. So this visibility of retail gaming that was even fueled in some way by the overload of advertising on TV, on media in general. So given the current situation, there's no retail gaming anymore, so it's less visible, and there's no advertising as well. In Italy has been banned, but in other countries has been reduced in this period. And the British operator have announced very recently that they are voluntarily removing all forms of advertising. So there's no visibility anymore. The political pressure then is shifting towards online gambling because it's seen as a risky activity for people who are stuck at home. And what's maybe impressed me that this time the industry seems to have reacted more promptly than in the past. And there's more attention to vulnerable players. And then just yesterday, the chief executive of the British, the Betting and Gaming Council, the largest trade association of gambling operators, declared that the gaming revenue of online gambling in the UK is down 30%. So it's not true that people are switching to online at the moment. So maybe this is the result of a combination of more attention from the industry side, and probably, unfortunately, less money to spend from the consumer side, because you know well how the economy is being affected by the situation. So from the perspective of Playtech, we have been working a lot in trying to promote a more responsible approach to gambling in the last years, well before the pandemic. And for instance, we have been developing tools that use artificial intelligence to analyze the player's behavior in real time, so to spot those who can be at risk of becoming problematic. And then we've been trialing in-play customized messages to interact with those players, to see if we can intervene and steer their behavior before it's too late. And we are also leading at the moment a cross-industry research group on game design, whose objective is to identify those characteristics of games, of slot games especially, that might generate addiction in vulnerable players. So we are using these tools now on our clients, and so far it doesn't seem that the situation, the risk level is getting higher. What's interesting is that actually by far the growth in number of new players is happening on less gambling-oriented games, especially bingo and poker and tournament poker. The growth is impressive, and it's a demonstration that people maybe in this phase are looking more for entertainment or social entertainment than the adrenaline of the pure gambling. So, to conclude, I guess the industry is getting better. A bit because it's been forced, a bit because they fear that there could be a repercussion in protecting vulnerable players. So when this is over, again, I don't see why we can't keep this momentum going. There's so many learning in that this increased attention is giving us, that we can use in the future and even apply in some way to retail gaming when it will be possible to offer it again. So if we are able to maintain this commitment to safer gambling, maybe we can regain some trust in the future from policymakers, which will be hopefully less inclined to introduce universal restrictions or one-size-fits-all measures, like spending limits or like advertising bans, which actually risk to push players offshore instead of actually protecting them. So I'm thinking maybe there's a phase 2 of gambling is possible, in which operators face less restrictions, as long as they can demonstrate, they can identify and isolate the most vulnerable players. It's like in the wider society, there's a phase 2 where the restrictions will be imposed only and targeted only on those locations where there is an outbreak. On the other hand, there's a risk, because there's a lot of less revenue when things will get back to normal. Some companies might be tempted to rush and be commercially aggressive to recover the lost revenues. And that would put, again, the industry in a bad situation like in the past. But if we resist this temptation and continue to be responsible, as we are finally demonstrating we can be, maybe we can seriously improve the sustainability of the sector for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. Clearly, it could be definitely an opportunity to review some principle and some rules of engagement towards the society. I would like to ask Andrea Rossi. You're part of a group that clearly have in his DNA the online and mobile at global level. So it would be interesting to see, how you guys have been dealing with this crisis, and what kind of future you see for a company like yours.
Sure. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Alessio, for having me here. Thank you. So the situation is okay. We all know it's a very very hard. The gaming industry is being hit heavily from several factors. One is the removal of sports, the damage on the offering that we usually could have on our websites. So we are facing several challenges for the time being. I would like to mention one for an international operator like Betson, which is operating in a different legislation or jurisdictions. So Betson operates in 12 of those. So we have had some challenges in order to adapt to the different measure and to the different guidelines that we have been informed to follow, right, from the different jurisdictions. This is one of the way that we had to adapt to the situation, and was not very easy because of course it also involves some technical developments or changes in our technology, which we all know that sometimes takes some time to put everything in place. But of course we are embracing this, we are understanding, we are following the directions of different governments, and of course we are happy to support in this. Another challenge that we faced, and was mentioned from the other panelists before me, was the remote working. So we have to adapt to that basically overnight, as Francesco was saying, right? So we had to adapt to the situation, and as a first step that we have put in place was to design a continuity plan for our employees and for the company, right? So providing connectivity and access and the right tools to keep working in a comfortable way from home. So far, as other colleagues mentioned before, is working surprisingly well. The team are really working hard, giving 100%, and always going to the extra mile. But we need to be careful, in my opinion, because there's a risk of burn down around the corner, because working from home, you need to manage time, you might lose the perception, and probably go over what you usually do. So there's efficiency, but we need to be careful in order to avoid too much, let's say. So Betson, I'm happy to say that, because our HR team has done an amazing job in order to mitigate this. So we have seen yoga sessions during working hours to take a break. We have participated to different type of trainings, and gaming team organized casino and poker tournaments. So we are trying to keep the spirits on a positive side also in this tough situation, which is really important. To confirm that, we have sent out a survey, for example, in mid-April, and the 80% of our employees actually stated that they feel they feel good working from home. They have the support that they need, and they keep engaged in what it is, the bets on cultures and value. So sometimes it's very there's a risk that you lose also the group, the company values and the culture when you are isolated in a lockdown situation. So this was also done to exclude any possible issue that might arise in a lockdown situation, as I was saying before, the burn down situation. On a product side, let's say that the COVID-19 situation, of course, we have mentioned here in the panel that has heavily impacted the whole gaming industry, both land-based and online, I would say. Some companies are most probably more affected than others, especially those that are mainly focused on sports betting and retail. Others, like online casino focused, in some cases are seeing an increase in activity. So for Betson also, the lack of sports event affected the sportsbook activity quite strongly. And of course, the sport events has been cancelled and or postponed, and limiting, of course, the offering and the appealing of sportsbook products. However, our strategy was also the one to have a product differentiation and actually a good activity on casino. And let's say that we are not experiencing a big downtrend in that sense. Of course, we are experiencing a decrease, that for sure. Sportsbook, of course, is an important product for us, but the casino could mitigate the lack of sports events. Of course, we are seeing an intake of new consumer, new customers coming in. There's probably the need of being entertained in this situation. People has more time at home, more time available, so they are looking for some sort of entertainment. And online gaming, let's remember that as gaming in general is entertainment for the majority of people. So the shifting between traditional ways of consuming entertainment, let's put away, it would be the offline or any other goodies, like I would say now is the traditional grocery shopping is made online, right? So the people is getting used to use the online technology in order to do simple things that before were mainly done offline. However, even though we are seeing an increase in new customers coming into our platform, we are not seeing an increase in spending. And that I want to align or agree with Francesco when I say that there's a more recreational way of consuming our services than before. It could be just because there's more attention into spending. Of course, probably this situation is driving also more consciousness, let's say. But also, I would say that it's a reflection of what responsible companies has put in place, because as far as I understood from the whole industry, it's one of the main action that the gaming industry has taken is to reinforce the responsible gaming in terms of straightness, the procedures, or whether it was the responsible gaming messages that were increased or let's say put in a way where customer were put in a position to be protected even better than before. And it's interesting and good to see this. I totally agree on the fact that this is the right way we have to move forward, and we cannot give up once the emergency ends or we go back to normality. This should be a good incentive for the gaming industry to keep going, to keep focusing on what's really matter to the importance of player protection. Say that. Let's say that the group is performing well, and this is good, and because we are not in a situation where we had to stop developing what we have planned. We are keep going. Of course, we had to change the order of prioritization. For example, we had the Euro and the Copa America in summer. Of course, at the beginning of the year, we planned a lot of activities around this. Was the core of the year, let's say. So now, of course, as we all know, is not happening. They're not happening. So we have to change the prioritization accordingly. But I would say that this condition requires a high level of adaptation and agility, as things we are seeing are changing almost on a daily basis. So moving forward, well, I'm seeing that the restarting won't be fast. Is a slow process, especially in those countries that I mean, were affected the most. There still is uncertainties, so there is not clear the future, and we don't have the crystal ball, as mentioned before. But at the same time, I can see a strong desire to evade and going back to normality. So for the future, the companies, I believe, they need to aim to become more human, transparent, and they need to adapt fast. And so agility will be key to move forward. So I'm seeing a few points to tackle moving forward, which is a very strong collaboration with regulators. So a reciprocal collaboration, I would say, understand the requirements of both parties, so the operator side and on the regulator side. I'm seeing communication with customers that need to be reviewed and adapted accordingly. It would be a different way of communicating. We are seeing now for example, influencers are no longer so following as was before. So there's a certain level of humanity coming back in the game, right? So responsible gaming measures support customers towards the best customer experience, product differentiation, and relevancy. So be offered a wider product to our customers, be transversal, no longer vertical. That should be, in my opinion, the way to go. And then, of course, there's also the risk to have customers channelizing towards illegal operations. So, of course, the way of being able to promote our services in a legal environment whenever we are operating legally, it's very important. So banning advertisement, in my opinion, can be a big risk in this situation, as of course, the customers will be able to go offshore at any time, and offshore operators will be able to advertise without any restriction. So we need to take care of our customers and offer a safe and transparent environment to be entertained. To you, Christian.
Thank you, Andrea. That's very interesting, and clearly, you know, on the betting side, the introduction of the event will be crucial. So I would like to ask Ludovico, Ludovico Calvi, from your point of view, you know, you've been closely following the events, and as well as you've been following what happened on the sport event and the integrity related to that. So we'd like to have your view on what happened and what you expect in the future.
Well, I mean, first of all, good morning, and thank you, Alessio, Gioco News, and hi, everyone. Basically, these are unprecedented times, so it's very difficult for anyone to think that we have not experienced anything like this for 100 years. So more than a live generation. So whatever we say, whatever we have been bombarded with, needs to be assessed, reassessed, and changed in terms of approach. So the degree of flexibility needed is very high. And I would say that representing, you know, over 33, 34 lotteries and many stakeholders, public and private stakeholders with a global lottery monitoring system, what we've witnessed is the priority, the main concern, which obviously is our health and safety. So many gaming organizations, as we have heard today, have been putting the well-being of people before anything else. This means also making sure that people were aware of what was going on, because the confusion has been also coming from the frustration of not knowing precisely what's happening. So there has been a need of clear, transparent, and comprehensive communication strategy, which could have been deployed regularly on touch points with business partners, with employees, with customers, even with public and institutions. So effective communication has been absolutely key. This has brought a sense of togetherness, a sense of community as well, which has helped because we all been indoors at home. Gaming organization had to review and continue guaranteeing business continuity. So that means reviewing organizational processes to quickly adapt to what's happening, to the existing needs. So reallocate resources, for example, from retail into the digital space, making sure that employees could be trained during this period, and that they would feel absolutely active and contributed effectively to what was happening. And there's been a lot of engagement, and the company being able to engage employees and partners effectively have also been having the highest, let's say, degree of commitment by the same people staying at home. And I also think, as you know, I was listening to Jason, let's not forget that the World Health Organization has encouraged governments to incentivize cashless transactions and operations, since banknotes have considered a way of spreading the virus. And therefore, many governments are taking actions to store banknotes and reducing the circulation of cash. That's in the US, in Asia, and elsewhere. So of course, there is more than a need to use cashless transactions. But you know, on that point, you know, from that point, you need time to organize the processes internally and make sure that we are able, in recovery and post-recovery strategies, to define how do we want to open up, what are the PPE provisions we put in place. Can we use a card or the plexiglass, whether that's a casino or a bingo? What is the age of the customers which are going to be particularly vulnerable and still vulnerable until we have a vaccine? So I think, you know, the activities of many organizations and lotteries in particular, which I represent, have been also on significant cost-cutting exercises, which has been launched to safeguard profitability and cash flow, including reviewing the salaries and putting in place furlong schemes. But also what has been extremely important is to take on the tax relief programs, as well as loans and grants offered by governments, and to assess the eligibility of these programs to allow companies to continue guaranteeing what is going to be a very difficult year. We're talking about 20–30%. We have been talking about sports. The lack of sports, Christian, the absence of sports has opened a huge window for criminal organizations. You won't believe it. As soon as COVID-19 outbreak, and you know, I'm in Italy as you, we are on the 8th week of lockdown, and you know, there has been a mild opening. We have seen, as GLMS, you have never been so busy as in the last 2 months. We have seen ghost matches. We've seen match fixing cases in places such as Nicaragua, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Belarus. You know, we have had issues with esports, with completely anonymous esports tournaments, online, and I was listening very carefully to what Heathcliff was saying with the issue of esports and the implications. Of course, we need to make esports you know, a very solid and corporate social responsible sports, so that you know, the issues everyone is looking at, doping, match fixing, some of the violence of the sports, the fact that the athletes are very young. When you are 20, you are too old. And if you are 16, possibly you are actually faster than anyone else. So there are implications when it comes to integrity and offering this type of sports by regulators to look at what can really be offered, because we need to face this. And this is a huge opportunity. I agree, it's a huge opportunity, sports in general. But again, going back to what GLMS as Integrity Association is witnessing, is a huge degree of cautiousness, attention. We know that sports will have a tough times, because closing altogether the world of sports for 2 months is actually creating you know, situations where low-profile clubs, but even you know, mid you know, profile clubs are going to be having a hard time, and this will implicitly again offer the opportunity to criminal organization to intervene. Therefore, what is after? What is the new normal? The new normal will be at stages. Who will prevail and what will happen? Well, we need to really start taking one step at a time. And in as much as I think that human being will be back in the center of gravity for many companies, trying to really look at how to assess employees effectively because of merits, and not because of you know, what they may have done in the past, but what they've done in terms of competencies and what they've achieved. I think strongly about the fact that we will have M&As activities. We will see healthy companies prevail and taking opportunities in the mid and short term, certainly. We also see how the customer behavior will change, and has changed already. We have mentioned, Andrea mentioned, you know, grocery shopping online. Yes, I mean, this is going to be the case. Are we going to have rush hours in you know, large metropolitan areas? Will we have a longer week where you would work actually 5 days but within 7? And possibly home working, smart working will be you know, the new normal, where you know, will decrease cost and work more effectively from home. So, but when we think about customers, we think that there will be a need of living services, creating highly segmented evolving of product and services, which again will not necessarily benefit the brand or the prize money you win, but the customer journey, the experience, the emotional experience you are putting in. And this is very important. It's you know, going accelerating from what we were seeing from one solution fits all to one-to-one, you know, one to one customer. So we also have seen how the level of compliance will be raised, and it's been raising in the last years, I would say. So this process by regulators would be accelerating. Governments are more and more in need of regulating and generating state revenues, and they will be very careful to the degree of compliance. And with that, I mean how processes will be automated when it comes to anti-money laundering, responsible gaming, match fixing, levels of compliance. We need to be using, obviously, automated processes in order to be more accurate, more efficient, to deliver a product life cycle, which is what the market wants. And the use of data would be absolutely key. I mean, I agree with Heathcliff when it comes to what do we read in data will be actually what the base on which the decision will be obviously made. I think that we need to be much more rapid in the delivery models and how fast we deliver an app, how scalable and measurable the delivery will be for customers and B2B and B2C customers, because this is where the market is going. And therefore, how we do that is, of course, with artificial intelligence powered by data and analytics. It will be guiding the customer experience and the business performance. So I'm actually talking to a specific customer because I know his behavior, and in as much as I know how much he is vulnerable in terms of compulsive gaming, I know what he likes, I know what he doesn't like, and so on. So I think applied intelligence will actually be accelerated during machine learning during this process. But what I think will be absolutely key is changing company culture. We need company personality changes. Personality changes as in, gaming organization, which will be able to reward risk-taking, will encourage cross-functional, and obviously will be data-driven in terms of evolution. So all in all, I think that this will be the kind of new normal, but we will actually be achieving that in steps because we don't know what's going to happen. I think that when we will have a vaccine and we will reach a level of stability, we can say that we will be in a completely different world. But this is where we are heading. And again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. This is new for everyone. We have not experienced anything like that in over 100 years since the Spanish flu. And we are in a completely different era. So I don't trust those who are 100% sure to define precisely what's going to happen, because this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Therefore, we need to work step by step.
Thank you, Ludovico. That's very interesting. And actually, we have a number of questions. I'll come back to this regarding, how the product and the strategy of the operator might change or need to change in order to adapt. Peter Remers, I would like to have your point of view. You're a veteran in the industry. You'll be seeing a lot of up and down. So, what is your view in relation of what happened and possible future?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Alessio. Thank you, Christian. And maybe just to look at the effect on in the short term, because if you know me, you know I'm a traveler, which means I travel a lot every week, always, and then all of a sudden it had to stop. So my wife, my children, my friend thought he's going to have withdrawal symptoms. But honestly, I'm dealing with it. And it looks like that people can just adjust to the situation in a not always easy way, but in a normal way. And honestly, my wife is very happy with it because I'm helping her doing the garden, and I hate doing garden, if I'm honest. So to say, as you may know, I'm in what I always call the responsible gambling industry for more than 30 years. And in the first years, it was very difficult. There was not a lot of interest. And if there was mainly lip service. There was no online gambling in those days as well. And when online gambling was introduced, it was mentioned that the problems related to gambling would be at least 10 times as high as they would be when you only look at the land-based industry. But that doesn't seem to be true. I don't say it's not a problem, absolutely not. But you have to look at it from a certain perspective, so to say. And I think Francesco talked about it as well. Maybe you do remember poker was a hype. Was it 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that? And in those days, in my country, the Netherlands, it was mentioned that we would have at least 40,000 young addicted poker players. The only problem was we couldn't find them, and they didn't seek help, so to say. And since we have the corona, the COVID-19 one, everyone tells us we are going to face a huge problem. And of course, there will be people that are going to play more and more online. And I mean, that's what I do every now and then as well. I bet on Swedish horse racing, trotting, in a very limited way, to be honest. When I looked at the websites, I see more races because that's the only country where they never stopped the horse racing. Eh? I mean, some other countries are coming back now already as well. But that happened to me in the very first weeks. I haven't placed a bet in the past 2 weeks at all of all those days. But anyway, so the question is, will problems grow? And some regulators say yes, so they may take all kinds of measures regarding limits, etc. And some operators say no. So the question is what we do. What do we do? And I mean, 30 years in responsible gambling, now it's there and it's always there. Every regulator talks about it. It's the #1 topic, and it should be the #1 for operators as well. So I used to say we know so much, but we know so little at the very same time. I mean, I'm not a researcher, but the question is the problem as big as it is? And that's why we need research, preferably evidence-based research, as Francesco was mentioning it as well. But the other thing is, if we don't have evidence-based, and if we have to wait too long, maybe we should look at best practices because they are the second best solutions. And I think Heathcliff mentioned that in a somewhat different way as well. Getting back to Corona, COVID measures, I mean, that's what you see. The UK gambling firms are stopping advertising on radio and television. That's the thing that the Betting Gaming Council has introduced as well, at least for the whole period that this thing is going on. But maybe we should also look at social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, because especially for young people, that's the big thing where they get their information from. I mean, there's a call for limits. You see these in countries, Portugal, Sweden, Spain, Belgium, Finland, and I probably miss some others as well, related to weekly limits, daily limits. There's a huge fear of increasing problem gambling related to the isolation and the boredom. It's a disaster for gambling addicts, as is being said. Some recovery say, after 500 days of not gambling, I've had a relapse. But I've read articles as well that Corona is the best thing that could happen to some individuals because they are not interested in online gambling. And they say, if there's no possibility for people to play in a land-based situation, it's the best thing you can do. And you have to do this cold turkey, stop from one day to the other. So which direction should the industry take? I think not everything will change, to be honest. It was mentioned, Heathcliff and some others as well, increase in esports. Well, that's mainly then not even playing the game because esports were being played anyway, but it's the betting on esports, and it's maybe even the match fixing things that are related to those things as well that we should look at. It's temporary or not? I think not everything is going to change. Tailor working, as it was mentioned this morning, partly possible, but our business is training and doing audits, at least to a big extent. For e-learning projects that we deliver, it's not a problem, but we deliver face-to-face training sessions as well. I mean, if you have to do exercises related to how to deal with customer-based situation, you have to do this in a face-to-face situation. And Jason mentioned the screen in between the machines. I mean, our actors are talking about if we should do these things in the same situation as well. Jason mentioned the app. Spending limits, and if you have won your money, it's getting to the app as well. Sometimes I think responsible gambling is still for the happy few, because I know a lot of companies, big companies as well, and I know on very well since I don't know how many years. I know Playtech, I know Snitech. I mean, I know a lot of different companies. Managing with the crisis, for me personally, training, we don't deliver any training at all. And if we are going to do this, we have to do this in smaller groups, which makes things more expensive. We don't do audits on a limited scale, maybe even a remote. And oh, but there's one more thing. That's what Heathcliff probably remembers. 2 years ago, we had a conference in Malta of the European Association for the Study of Gambling. And we are supposed to have our next one in Oslo in September. And honestly, at this very moment, I was supposed to be in Oslo because we would like to do the final check, arriving yesterday and leaving Oslo again today. But when we wrote to our partner, because you have to go 40 days in quarantine, that's possible to come to Oslo. And I thought that was a bit too much. So honestly, this is not a scary situation, but a situation that I have some fear of if we can have this conference or not. And I mean, and means of communication like these ones, as we are doing now at this very moment, is one thing, but meeting people in person and talking and discussing and exchanging information is another thing. So I hope that will still be possible in the future. And if not in September, we have to do it at another moment. Maybe one final thing that I try to mention in all kinds of situations as well. When we look at prevalence rates, of people that are having problems with gambling, they seem to be rather stable, so to say. Not only in my country, but in most of the countries in the whole world. So maybe that means that we are able to control ourselves, maybe in a better way than we usually think we can. So anyway, the new normal, I hope it's getting back to the old normal as well, to a certain extent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, for that. Very interesting, and we'll go back to some change in the future. Birgit, to you, from your point of view, your experience, what is the main element you've seen and what you expect for the future?
Right. So hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to see a lady in the room, so to speak. So just so you know, I am not anymore speaking on behalf of the Danish Gambling Authority, which I left a month ago. I do love them all, and I do miss them terribly, and I did love my job, but it was time to try new things, make use of my knowledge throughout the years. So here I am. You could argue that my timing for going out there as a consultant might not be the best one. But I just happened to give notice just before Corona entered the scene. So never mind, I stand by it, and I think still that it's a very exciting new times. So hopefully I will be able to make use of what I think I know. So at least I got a few weeks of crisis still at the DGA. And I would like to share with you how they look like from a regulator's perspective. So every morning getting up, having a crisis meeting with the board of directors and the minister's office, and then going back to own colleagues, telling them, sharing what was decided by government and so forth, and what would be happening in the ministry, and then eventually getting down to our own business as regulators. So quite busy days, and we did that for weeks, more or less every day. At the same time as regulator, just as yourselves mentioned, more or less all of you, apart from actually dealing with situations you haven't been in before, probably, you're dealing with people being worried. So I spend quite a lot of time taking care of people, actually, in the very best way. And at these kind of times, it's important to remember your values. They stand out clear, and it stands out clear if you don't have any. So I think for better and for worse, it's a great thing to realize if you really do have values in your company, in your jurisdiction, which actually works. So we actually had, in sad circumstances, a very good time dealing with all the new challenges. People made a lot of gags and gigs during working hours, and I supported it all. And we had toured the home. People were sharing how they lived and how they worked at home and so forth. Anyway, after those weeks, I left. So now it's a new director there. But I would speak as a regulator as such, saying what to expect from regulators and legislators in a situation like this. One of the challenges would be that politicians, obviously, and legislators obviously tend to chuck aside everything else but the most essential pieces of legislation. And that will almost never be gambling legislation. Apart from a few jurisdictions around the world, we have all been used to not being in front when it comes to new legislation. So at this kind of crisis, we will find ourselves in the back row of the focus area for politicians and legislators, which is a tough one. And being a regulator, I think we would have to expect the regulators to step up. We were never more busy, actually, the weeks that I followed DGA still, and I expect regulators around the world to be quite busy because they are met with new demands, requirements, expectations from industry, from organizations, but also from those politicians being well aware of the changes in the gaming world. So I would say, apart from running, having staff members to take care of, having a minister, having legislators to deal with, as a regulator, you need to get to a point very quickly where you look at your procedures and processes and make changes. You have to make adjustments. We made some adjustments within the first week even. We had to modify, change our requirements, simply because some of it couldn't be done. You had to deal with on-site requirements when it comes to technical matters, couldn't be done. So were you to lose your license just because that wasn't fulfilled within the deadline? We had to make changes there and so forth. So you could argue that you could expect from regulators to be open to changes and be open to modify or change requirements in the long term or in the very short term. Also, I would say, as a regulator, you naturally get a greater focus on advertising, on whether there will be a more aggressive way of trying to keep your sale going, whether you will be less focused on taking care of players. So really also focusing on new games popping up, new industry, illegal markets popping up, and also being aware that the usual stakeholders in the industry, lobbyists and so forth, might not be as active as they used to be. So you might have to be even more aware yourself of what's happening out there. So really, there will be a lot of new risks to deal with as a regulator, and not to be paranoid in any way. But I think it takes a lot of guts to actually look up and look out. And that can't be done by the regulator themselves in their own jurisdictions only. So as I've always advocated for, you know, you need to be international in your focus, and you need to make use of all the splendid organizations we have out there. And obviously also, as we've always done in Denmark, make use also of industry, yourselves gathered here today, but really very much so take advantage of all the new thoughts and ways that we are all dealing with, and actually try to help each other out. This should not be a competition. This should not be to catch only the bad guys out there, but it should really be to support the good ones. And it should really be about finding new ways quickly to make sure that both taking care of players are still intact, but also industry, the legal industry, will be intact. As a regulator, that is what it's all about, to preserve and protect the legal markets at all times, in order to protect players and in order to keep the balance in society that was once meant by the legislation around gaming. So really, to me, it's a very, very busy time, I could imagine. And I know from some regulators, it's very busy times, it should be. So focus areas for regulators around the world, definitely looking for match fixing, AML, cash flow payments, people trying to take advantage of the confusion and the disruption going on out there. There will be much more exposure, and we won't be able to see it all when it comes to gambling adverts. Not all of them will be probably all that legal. So it's difficult to get at it all when it's not necessarily out in the open, and we can't be land-based either. I mean, my former colleagues checking out casinos and so forth had to stay home. So in many ways we are vulnerable in new ways, and we haven't tried before. I worry about minors staying home away from school, with less perhaps to do in their spare time, perhaps even being exposed more to what dad and mom do. If they're playing games, they might influence the minors in doing the same thing, not only for good reasons, but also for wrong reasons, to keep them occupied. So I worry about that as well. So all in all, higher vulnerability between players. Social media exposure might be more typical when you stay at home that much. So really, that is some of the worries as a regulator, that a regulator should deal with and look deep into whether there's any need for just temporary changes in requirements and way of doing checks and so forth, but also in the longer perspective. So embracing actually all the new inventions, all the new ideas that some of you mentioned as well. I think that is sort of like a dream come true in a way, that on a very, very sad background again, we can make some good come out of this if we embrace all the innovation going on. And I clearly agree that data is one of the key words here, and also embracing and supporting how to deal with the opening of the land-based market, how for regulators to deal with social issues. I mean, we're not cut out to actually deal with how to protect people from getting the COVID virus. I mean, we have to deal with new kind of ways of cooperating with health personnel and so forth. So that's a complete new area to a regulator within gambling. And also, I would argue that in times of crisis, it is really important not to panic. And it's really important, again, to not forget about the long perspective. Some of you mentioned that as well. This will be over and done with sooner or later. And it will leave some traces and some new ways. And we will need to actually consider 2021, 2022 now, especially also on the legislative side. So really, if a regulator are focused on legislation within the next 1 or 2 years, that would be absolutely great, also for industry. So really, it's very much about keep calm, cool, and connected. Take advantage of all the new ideas and make use of each other. It's not a competition, as I mentioned. It's more about finding solutions, and regulators should really, really care about what they spend their time on and how to support both taking care of players, but also really taking care of the legal market and protect us all against illegal gambling. That was all for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Birgit. Actually, you touched a couple of points. I would like to now to that have been touched by a number of questions that we received. So I would like kind of we receive a number of questions, and I would like kind of to join in three areas. So there is a number of questions in relation to the habits of the player. So do you believe that there will be a change in the habit of players, both in the channel, so you know, playing on the online-based or mobile or on online operation? So that's the first question regarding the habits of players. The second group of questions basically are all in line with the product. So, you know, how the product should be adapted. We've been talking about esport, virtual. Clearly, the lack of live sports betting has moved into social gaming. So we saw a spike in poker and all the social game, bingo, and all the skill games. And the third element of question are in relation to what should be done or what should be proposed to the regulators in terms of protecting the operator and the players towards the legal, and in relation with the integrity of some event that have been offered that Ludovico mentioned before. So what I would like to ask is everybody like 2-3 minutes each in relation to the habits of player, the development of the products, and the kind of activity of measure that can put in place in order to protect from the legal and onto the integrity. I would like to start with you, Jason.
Okay. Okay, well, for us, first of all, I just want to, Francesco mentioned that Michael Duggar, I believe it was Michael Duggar from the Betting and Gaming Council, announced a 30% drop in online since COVID. Does that take into account the temporary stoppage of sports betting?
I guess so. It's not specified in the interview, but of course there's.
So the information that we received is, although there's been a drop in sports betting, so there's been a 30% drop, but sports betting was quite a large part of online. So therefore, it's quite clear that more players are playing slots online. The habits of the player, I mean, that's a very difficult one, because during COVID-19, there is no doubt people are scared. And therefore, you have a player that would normally play land-based is now playing at home, where they are isolating, they have no fear of catching COVID-19, they're not touching cash, coins, buttons on machines, they're not sat next to somebody else who's coughing and sneezing, and so they're in a, the player may feel they're in a more safer environment. I believe that players will want to come out again for the social aspect that they get from a land-based gaming venue. The interaction with other humans, you know, talking to people, that's the one thing that most people have been deprived of. Although we can speak via Zoom, which has been fantastic, and obviously the phone and everything, nothing really beats a face-to-face conversation. And I think that we will see the players come out again. I think that they will return to land-based gaming. I believe that players play across all mediums of gaming. So I believe that if they're playing in the land-based, they're playing online at home as well. You know, I don't think you have specific players or specific sectors. So I do believe that we will see the customers back out again on the high street. I wrote some notes down here as well. So sports betting, excuse me one second. One of the other things as well, Bridget was mentioning about minors. And I know a friend of mine who's a doctor, who's a pediatric doctor, they're very concerned about getting the children back to school. One of the things they were saying is that the vulnerable children, so schools are still open in the UK for key workers and also vulnerable children. The schools only received 5% of the vulnerable children they were expecting. So it is very important that you get it. Of course, the other thing, it's a bit of a joke in the UK at the moment, is that the wine sales have gone up considerably in the supermarkets. So are we going to be left with a generation of children who have been homeschooled by alcoholics in the future? I mean, this is something people may need to think about. I tend to think that when we're all talking about the new normal, I agree more with Peter on this, in that I think people will return to their old habits. With this virus in place, I can't really see how restrictions can be lifted totally until there's a vaccine. But when there is a vaccine, I would imagine people will return to normal. It's how we behave. The one thing I think we will experience more of, I think there's more of a community feel. I'm certainly experiencing that when I talk to people, and there's more of a community feel in those towns, villages where that community shop has been open to allow them to go and get their supplies, where they may normally have gone to the supermarket to do the majority of their shopping. And I think those things will help, and they'll help on the high street with people around mixing, wanting to speak to each other. So I do think things will be different, but not forever. Not forever. Is that enough, Cristiano?
Very much. Very much. So thank you for that. Same question for you, Francesco. You know, regarding the habits, the players and measures in relation to policies to be introduced.
Yeah, thanks. Very quickly. Yeah, I mostly agree with Jason. It's at some point we need human contact, and things will slowly revert back to normal. Now, I'm find interesting the surge of poker, because it was said before, in the first 2 years it was massive. Everybody was playing poker. And then poker has been probably eaten out by sharks, by people making money at the expenses of the fish, of the less experienced people. Now those people, those players are trying again, finding this form of entertainment, and then reading that there's professional poker player making money again out of poker, with the risk of going back to the same mechanism that, let's say, depressed the poker in the past. So I'm wondering if this time there's a way to make poker less to the benefit of a professional player, and avoid being milked out by them, by keeping it more recreational. I don't know. Then just it's a pity that poker as a social game has been has declined so far, so much. And then lastly, the offshore risk of pushing people offshore. That's again what I mentioned before. There's the tendency recently, even before the emergency, of regulators, actually politicians mostly, to put universal restrictions, apart from the advertising. But mostly at the moment in the Nordics, it's spending limits. So you can spend only up to an amount of money in a given time frame. Yeah, I'm not sure this will actually help. And because there's people who can afford to spend more, because they have no problems and they have money, and these people will the urge to go elsewhere. And then if those people become problematic because they're playing offshore, no one cares. So that's the risk of universal restrictions. And then for that, I'd like to hear also from Birgit and Heathcliff.
Yeah.
Because that's the new trend. One size fits all restrictions instead of concentrating of those players who need to be protected. And we have the tools to do that.
Thank you, Francesco. Heathcliff, regarding this element of protection, what's your view, your authority views?
Well, I think if you're talking about the illegal, the black market, I'm assuming. I think, to be honest, and this I've said it quite a number of times in various interventions. I believe that as politicians, potentially as regulators as well, but as Birgit said, ultimately regulators need to deal with the politicians. So ultimately they need to consider the political agenda of that particular country. However, to be honest, I believe that as countries, as governments, as regulators, we focus too much energy on the legal operators, on the licensed operators. So each and every regulator focuses on those who have a license. But ultimately we forget that, and sometimes it's potentially convenient not to admit it, that the black market exists. So there is a black market. The black market is huge, and in situations like these, where there are these overarching restrictions, I would say, the black market thrives. But as Francesco said, in the black market, the issues are different. In the black market, there is no player protection. We have no idea what's happening. We have no idea whether or not they have the responsible gaming measures in place. We have no idea whether there is money laundering or not. And many a times, unfortunately, because the black market can do away with a number of restrictions put by different countries, obviously they can have even a better offering. Why? Because they have less costs tied to that offering. So we are in a situation where I would say you can easily say a good 80-20 rule. If we had to apply the 80-20 rule here, ultimately 80% of the energy of each and every country is focused on those operators who are licensed, who are paying the taxes, who have all the responsible gaming measures in place. Then sometimes not even the 20% is put on the illegal operators, those who are bypassing each and every regulation, those who are not licensed by anyone, who simply have websites up in place simply to attract customers. And what sometimes we fail to understand is that in the online world, a player, and I'm not saying that it's the right approach or not, however, for the vast majority of players, as long as they find an online website, they place a bet and they get the money back, for them that's safe enough, because they placed the wager, they got the money back, so for them it's good enough. And unfortunately, some of the companies who are in the black market, they manage to become popular based on this. So ultimately, we need to focus, in my opinion, more, but much more energy, or at least we give equal importance in terms of restrictions when it comes to the legal operators, but we need to focus and have the same amount of effort, the same amount of energy on stopping what we call the black market.
Thank you, Heathcliff. On this line, Andrea, clearly advertising to identify a regulated license operator from the rest. So, a short comment from you on that, as a number of markets are trying to limit or ban advertising for gaming operators.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's happening in Spain is what has been decided during the period of alert. So I mean, it's a good topic to discuss, especially here with relevant people from the industry, right? Because I believe we need to actually understand both parties. I mean, both point of view, the political point of view and the commercial point of view. We have been, as an industry, probably in the past, been too aggressive, too commercial, I would say. We never have been focused into what I like to call love the brand strategy more than aggressive commercial. For example, in Italy, before with our brand Star Casino, before the ban of advertisement was put in place, we decided to remove any commercial, any bonus announcement in our TVC. honestly, we didn't see a change in acquisition. Actually, I would say that we increased acquisition. Then it makes me think, okay, we are doing something that probably we believe that is good for the business, but in fact it's not. So I would like to put on the table the proposal to say, okay, let's have the possibility to promote legal brands in an informational way. So in a way that we can inform customer more than be pushing some offers. As a matter of fact, that all the brands that we see that are successful, I mean, from Nike to Carlsberg, for example, I never seen an advertisement in TV saying, buy one and we give you six beers free. I mean, it's all built in terms of how you are perceived as a brand in terms of transparency and trustworthiness. So this is the way I would like to discuss how to move forward instead of banning. So let's try to embrace a different concept, make our industry more mature and more savvy in that sense. And probably this could be an opportunity, I would say.
Thank you, Andrea. Cannot share more. Ludovico, what's your view in relation to these, activities in relation with integrity and the legal market that the industry should take?
Well, I mean, very rapidly, I think that regulators, when it comes to the compliance issue, they need, of course, to continue raising the threshold. But that means that whatever has not been done in the last 10 years, because you've been too aggressive with bonuses, because you have very strong and aggressive VIP programs, because you've not been able to detect compulsive gaming attitude promptly. I think if that is true and it is valid, it's not the quantity of provisions put in place, but it's the quality of it. But what they also should be doing as regulators is to praise those who are doing the right thing. This is extremely important to create credibility and a level of which you're doing the right thing, and therefore I award you as a licensed operator. And I tell you that that is the case. I communicate to the world, which is made of consumer as well as licensed operators. This is important. I'm doing the right thing, and I am a leader, and the other will follow. Nobody's saying that. Regulators are ignoring this, and this is important for everyone, for all stakeholders. This is on, let's say, the legal scenario. On the legal ones, as in any economic crisis, and we are through a health crisis, and we are getting with both feet into a huge economic crisis. Criminal organizations are going to give you cash. They've got cash available. So whether that's free money, whether that's easier to launder the money or not, I mean, this is going to happen. There is a threat which is going to be more and more solid in the months and possibly years to come. And the reason for that is because people will be under constraints. So I've seen this during the absence of primary sports. I've seen what's happening. I can see that we need to be more vigilant as sports betting organizations, law enforcement agencies, regulators, to make sure that we know that what we are offering cannot lose credibility. And credibility means not only credibility towards the world of gaming, but also, the world of sports. If we lose credibility, and again, going back to the legal operators, even illegal operators, as Cliff was saying, could lose credibility simply because they don't pay. I remember, in the Far East 30 years ago, when I used to have, when I was working with Emil, the chance to talk to these gentlemen, and they used to tell me, look, I don't have a license, but if I don't pay, I'm out. I'm completely out of the market. Customers don't care. As long as they are paid, they are fine. So we need to create the credibility towards communication, and this is a collective responsibility. Cannot be left only in the hands of regulators or only in the hands of gaming organizations, which have decided all of a sudden that they want to be much more socially responsible. I think we have it, we owe it as a social duty to do it. So my takeaway is that we need to be more careful. What happens as soon as the sports, the primary sports resume, we need to look at also, second, third, fourth divisions, what we've been offering so far, and how eventually athletes could be vulnerable to fraudsters and match fixers.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Peter, you're an expert in this area. I would like really to have your view.
Maybe a couple of things very, very briefly, so to say. One thing is, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think we're going back to, can you hear me or not? Now you can. Okay, so one thing is that we probably are going back to a kind of normal life as well, because things that are being mentioned, amongst others by Francesco, poker, social games, I think that's not a solution, unless we make it more gambling and no skill is involved anymore, because otherwise the poker pros will win anyway. There's another thing I would like to say about advertising and marketing and limit of banning those things. I mean, I don't know if you are aware of it, but guys like Per Binde of the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, Jonathan Park from the UK, and Alex Basinski, they all tell us, based on a lot of research, that the effect of banning advertising has a limited effect. And the influence of advertising has a limited effect as well, apart from two groups. The vulnerable group, which is the ones of those people who are having a problem with gambling, and the young ones, the minors, so to say. So what we have to do, and what the industry has to do, and what regulators have to do, is we should have a focus on those two groups, the vulnerable. So it's not a matter of one size fits all. We have to make individual solutions for individual situations, maybe individual cases as well. I mean, I always think we should do the same in regard to responsible gambling as we do with our marketing efforts. And everyone who is an operator knows that all marketing efforts nowadays are focused on the individual. I think we should do the same in regard to responsible gambling. Is that good enough?
Very much. Thank you, Peter. Birgitta, go back to you. And we've been discussing about this, what's your view and your suggestion?
Right. So just at the edge of the webinar here, it's been a great pleasure listening in on so many wise guys. And I do value all of you as always. Lovely to be in your company for such a long time. So I think that my takeaways as a regulator, former regulator, would be that it is very important that regulators make some choices here. They can't deal with all the issues I mentioned at one time. So really very much focus on illegal activities coming up. Highly, highly important. I support that. And yeah, give some support and praise to, as I always call them, the good guys, including your own licensees, and look for willingness to be responsible and to get back on track in a good way. As I mentioned, it's not a matter of getting down on someone. It's a matter of getting everybody back in a good way, in a legal way, sustainable way. Also, I looked at ECBA. ECBA came up with a code of conduct very recently, made by some of the big operators out there. And I think that is an excellent example of initiatives in a situation like this. And it should happen all the time, I would say, to come up with code of conduct in a more international approach than what only one regulator, one jurisdiction can ever do. That kind of initiatives I would always support. Also, my takeaway would be, my final point would be, for new upcoming jurisdictions looking at regulating gambling for the first time, what is happening right now must be a very complicated matter to look at and to find a way through. So really reaching out to experienced industry, experienced advisors as well, but also looking to regulators already dealing with the crisis in a good way. It's highly important that the regulators stand together, help each other out here, because no one can really deal with this kind of challenge on their own, I believe. So hopefully my ex-colleagues will still reach out to each other, and definitely also reach out to industry, helping each other out.
Perfect. Thank you, Brigitte, and thank you all. I think it's clear that this moment is a moment of change and possibly of relaunch of the industry. Time is up, but we have a huge number of questions. So I think that at a certain point, probably we'll reconvene to see how these have developed in the positive, I'm sure, in the coming month. So thank you very much, all of you, for this morning. Thank you very much to Alessio and the Gioco News team for this panel today. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much
for excellent moderating. And thank you, Alessio, as well.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Alessio. Thank you
very much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.